Hello, darlings. Oh, I had a berry and it went down my throat the wrong way. Hold on just a second while I do this modern technology thing and I share you as we read The Sorrows of Satan. Let me see. I'm going to go back over here into I'm live. Look at that.
I'm live. Look at that.
I'm going to copy that. And we'll go right over here to the Book of Faces, as I like to say. And we'll go here to the Gentleman Psychic. Paste it there. Sorrows of Satan. Now, I have one more that I have to share. Let me see. Posts. Oh, come on. And then I will share that to my newsfeed. Now, hello, everybody. I apologize for not being here last week. I was out of town. I was visiting a friend in Pennsylvania, in Schaefferstown, Pennsylvania. And I am back now, which is really good. It is good to see everyone. We have 4 people, though I have no one in the chat yet, but we have 4 people here. I am so delighted to have you. Thank you for being here with the Gentleman Psychic, and I hope you're really enjoying The Sorrows of Satan. I have never read this book, but I think it's quite good. Anyway, lovelies, I know we have 4 people here, so I'm going to go ahead and start. I don't know why there's no one in the chat. Let's see. Maybe I'm participants. Oh, let's see. Nope. Okay, I don't know what I did there. Oh, okay. It's a pop-out chat. But now how do I go back? See, I'm kicking and screaming into the 21st century. It's good that I have it. I just don't understand it. Anyway, I hope that you are enjoying it. So we've got 5 people. And okay, here we go. The Sorrows of Satan, Chapter 9. My publisher, John Morganson, the estimable individual who had first refused my book and who now, moved by self-interest, was devoting his energies audaciously to the business of launching it in the most modern and approved style, was not, like Shakespeare's Cassio, strictly an honorable man. Neither was he the respectable chief of a long-established firm whose system of cheating of authors, mellowed by time, had become almost sacred. He was a new man, with new ways, and a good stock of new push and impudence. All the same, he was clever, shrewd, and diplomatic, and for some reason or other, had secured the favor of a certain portion of the press, many of the dailies and weeklies always giving special prominence to his publications over the heads of other far more legitimately dealing firms. He entered into a partial explanation of his methods when, on the morning after my first meeting with the Earl of Elton and his daughter, I called him upon to inquire how things were going with my regard to my book. "We shall publish next week," he said, rubbing his hands complacently, and addressing me with all the deference due to my banking account. "And as you don't mind what you spend, I'll tell you just what I propose to do. I intend to write out a mystifying paragraph of about some 70 lines or so, describing the book in a vague sort of way as likely to create a new era of thought, or ere long, everybody who is anybody will be compelled to read this remarkable work, or as something that must be welcome to all who would understand the drift of one of the most delicate and burning questions of the time. These are all stock phrases, used over and over and again by the reviewers. There's no copyright in them. And the last one always tells wonderfully, considering how old it is and how often has been made to duty, because any allusion to a delicate and burning question makes a number of people think the novel must be improper, and they send for it at once. He chuckled at his own precipitancy, and I sat silent, studying him with much inward amusement. This man, whose decision I had humbly and anxiously waited not so many weeks ago, was now my paid tool, ready to obey me in any possible extent for so much cash. And I listened to him indulgently while he went on unraveling his schemes for the gratification of my vanity and the pocketing of his extras. The book has been splendidly advertised, he went on. It could not have been more lavishly done. Orders do not come in very fast yet, but they will, they will. This paragraph of mine, which will take the shape of a leaderette, I can get inserted in about 800 to 1,000 newspapers here and in America. It will cost you, say, 100 guineas, perhaps a trifle more. Do you mind that? Not in the least, I replied, still vastly amused. He meditated for a moment, then drew his chair closer to mine and lowered his voice a little. You understand, I suppose, that I shall only issue 250 copies at first. This limited number seems to me absurd, and I protested vehemently. Such an idea is ridiculous, I said. You cannot supply the trade with such a scanty edition. Wait, my dear sir, wait. You are too impatient. You do not give me time to explain. All these 250 will be given away by me in the proper quarters on the day of publication. Never mind how. They must be given away. Why? Why? And the worthy Morganson laughed sweetly. I see, my dear Mr. Tempest, you are like most men of genius. You do not understand business. The reason why we give the first 250 copies away is in order to be able to announce at once in all the papers that the first large edition of the new novel by Geoffrey Tempest being exhausted on the first day of publication. A second is in rapid preparation. You see, we thus hoodwink the public, who of course are not in our secrets and are not to know whether an edition is 200 or 2,000. The second edition will, of course, be ready behind the scenes and will consist of another 250. Do you call that course of procedure honest? I asked quietly. Honest, my dear sir, honest? And his countenance wore a virtuously injured expression. Of course it is honest. I look at the daily papers. Such announcements appear every day. In fact, they are getting rather too common. I freely admit that there are few publishers here and there who stick up for the Institute and go to the trouble of not only giving the number of copies in an edition, but also publishing the date of each one as it was issued. This may be principle if they like to call it so, but it involves a great deal of precise calculation and worry. If the public like to be deceived, what is the use of being exact? Now, to resume, your second edition will be sent off on sale or return to provincial booksellers, and then we shall announce, in consequence of the enormous demand for the new novel by Geoffrey Tempest, the large second edition is out of print. A third will be issued in the course of next week, and so on, till we get the sixth or seventh edition, always numbering 250 each, in 3 volumes. Perhaps we can, by skillful management, work it up to a 10th. It is only a question of diplomacy and a little dexterous humbugging of the trade. Then we shall arrive at 1-volume issue, which will require different handling, but there is time enough for that. The frequent advertisements will add the expense a bit, but if you don't mind— I don't mind anything, I said, so long as I have my fun. Your fun? He queried surprisedly. I thought it was your fame you wanted more than fun. I laughed aloud. I'm not such a fool as to suppose that fame is secured by advertisement, I said. For instance, I am one of those who think the fame of Milius as an artist was marred when he degraded himself to the level of painting that little green boy blowing bubbles of Pear's soap. That was an advertisement, and that very incident in his career, trifling through though it seem, will prevent his ever standing on the same dignified height of distinction with such masters in arts as Romney, Sir Peter Lely, Gainsborough, or Reynolds. I believe there's a great deal of justice in what you say, and Morgeson shook his head wisely. Viewed from a purely artistic and sentimental standpoint, you are right. And he became suddenly downcast and dubious. Yes, it is a most extraordinary thing how fame does escape people sometimes, just when they seem on the point of grasping it. They are boomed in every imaginable way, and yet after time, nothing will keep them up. And there are others again who get kicked and buffeted and mocked and derided. Like Christ, I interposed with half a smile. He looked shocked. He was a nonconformist, but remembering in time how rich I was, he bowed with a meek patience. Yes, and he sighed, as you suggest, Mr. Tempest, like Christ, mocked and derided and opposed at every turn, and yet by the queerest caprice of destiny succeeded in the winning world-wide fame and power. Like Christ again, I said mischievously, for I loved to jar his nonconformist's conscience. Exactly. He pushed... Oh, I'm out of water. He paused, looking piously down, then with a return of secular animation he added, "But I was not thinking of the great example just then, Mr. Tempest. I was thinking of a woman." "Indeed," I said indifferently. "Yes, a woman who, despite continued abuse and opposition, is rapidly becoming celebrated. You are sure to hear of her in literary and social circles." And he gave me a furtive glance of doubtful inquiry. "But she is not rich, you know, only famous. However, we have nothing to do with her just now, so let us return to business. The one uncertain point in this matter of your book's success is the attitude of the critics. There are only 6 leading men who do the reviews, and between them they cover all the English magazines and some of the American too, as well as the London papers. Here are their names." And he handed me a penciled memorandum. "And their addresses as far as I can ascertain them, or the addresses of the papers for which most frequently write. The man at the head of the list, David Mcqueen, is the most formidable of the lot. He writes everywhere about everything. Being a Scotchman, he's bound to have his finger in every pie. If you can secure Mcqueen, you need not trouble so much about the others, as he generally gives the lead and has his own way with the editors. He is one of the personal friends of the editor of the 19th century, for example, and you would be sure to get notice there, which would otherwise be impossible. No reviewer can review anything for that magazine unless he is one of the editor's friends. You must manage Mcqueen, or he might, just for the sake of showing off, cut you up rather roughly." "That would not matter," I said, diverted at the idea of managing a Mcqueen. "A little slating always helps a book to sell." "Well, in some cases it does," and Morganson stroked his thin beard perplexedly. "But in others it is most emphatically does not. Where there is any very decided or daring originality, adverse criticism is always the most effective. But a work like yours requires fostering with favor. Wants booming, in short." "I see." And I felt distinctly annoyed. "You don't think my book original enough to stand alone?" "My dear sir, you are really, what shall I say?" And he smiled apologetically. "A little brusque. I think your book shows admirable scholarship and delicacy of thought. If I find fault with it at all, it is perhaps because I am dense. The only thing it lacks, in my opinion, is what I should call tenaciousness, for want of better expression. The quality of holding the reader's fancy fixed like a nail. But after all his common failing of modern literature, few authors feel sufficiently themselves to make others feel. I made no reply for a moment. I was thinking of Lucio's remarks on this very same subject. "Well," I said at last, "if I had no feeling when I wrote the book, I certainly have none now. Why, man, I felt every line of it, painfully and intensely." "Ah, aye, indeed," said Morganson soothingly. "Or perhaps you thought you felt, which is another very curious phrase of literature temperament. You see, to convince people at all, you must first yourself be convinced. The result of this is generally a singular magnetic attraction between the author and the public. However, I am a bad hand at argument, and it is possible that in hasty reading I may have gathered a wrong impression of your intentions. Anyhow, the book shall be a success if we can make it so. All I venture to ask of you is that you should personally endeavor to manage Mcqueen." I promised to do my best, and on this understanding we parted. I realized that Morganson was capable of greater discernment than I had imagined, and his observations had given me material for thought which was not altogether agreeable, for if my book, as he said, lacked tenacity, why then it would not take root in the public mind. It would be merely the ephemeral success of a season, one of those brief booms in the literary wares for which I had such unmitigated contempt, and fame would be as far off as ever, except that spurious imitation of it which the fact of my millions had secured. I was in no good humor that afternoon, and Lucio saw it. He soon elicited the sum and substance of my interview with Morganson, and laughed long and somewhat uproariously over the proposed managing of the redoubtable Mcqueen. He glanced at the 5 names of the other leading critics and shrugged his shoulders. "Morganson is quite right," he said. "Mcqueen is intimate with the rest of these fellows. They meet at the same clubs, dine at the same cheap restaurants, and make love to the same painted ballet girls, all in a comfortable little fraternal union together, and one obliges the other and their several journals when occasion offers. Oh, yes, I should make up a McWig if I were you. Make up 2 McWig if I were you. But how?" I demanded. For though I knew McQuig's name well enough, having seen it signed ad nauseum to literary articles in almost every paper extant, I had never met the man. "I cannot ask any favor of a press critic." "Of course not," said Lucio, and he laughed heartily again. "If you were to do so, such an idiotic thing that what a slating you'd get in your pains. There's no sport a critic loves so much as the flaying of an author who has made the mistake of lowering himself to the level of asking favors for his intellectual inferiors. Oh, no, no, my dear fellow. We shall manage Mcqueen quite differently. I know him, though you do not." "Come, that's good news," I exclaimed. "Upon my word, Lucio, you seem to know everybody." "I think I know most people worth knowing," responded Lucio quietly, "though I by no means include Mr. Mcqueen in the categories of worthiness. I happen to make his personal acquaintance in a somewhat singular and exciting manner. It was in Switzerland, on that awkward ledge of rock known as the Movis Pass. I had been some weeks in the neighborhood on business of my own, and being sure-footed and fearless, was frequently allowed by the guides to volunteer my services with theirs. And in this capacity of amateur guide, capricious destiny gave me the pleasure of escorting the timid and bilious Mcqueen across the chasms of the Mer de Glace, and I conversed with him in the choicest French all the while, a language of which, despite his boasted erudition, he was deplorably ignorant. I knew who he was, I must tell you, as I know most of his craft, and had long been aware of him as one of the authorized murderers of aspiring genius. When I got him on the Mauve Pas, I saw that he was seized with vertigo. I held him firmly by the arm and addressed him in sound, strong English, thus: 'Mr. Mcqueen, You wrote a damnable and scurrilous article against the work of a certain poet, and I named the man. An article that was a tissue of lies from beginning to end, and which by its cruelty and venom embittered a life of brilliant promise and crushed a noble spirit. Now, unless you promise to write and publish in the leading magazine a total recantation of this your crime when you get back to England, if you get back, giving that wronged man the honorable mention he rightly deserves, down you go. I have but to loosen my hold. Geoffrey, you should have seen Mcqueen then. He whined, he wriggled, he clung. Never was an oracle of the press in such an unoracular condition. Murder, murder, he gasped, but his voice failed him. Above him towered the snow peaks like the summits of that fame he could not reach and therefore grudged to others. Below him, the glittering ice waves yawned in deep transparent hollows of opaline blue and green. And afar off, the tinkling cowbells echoed through the still air, suggestive of safe green pastures and happy homes. Murder, he whispered grudgingly. Nay, said I, 'tis I should cry murder. For if ever an arresting hand held a murderer, mine holds one now. Your system of slaying is worse than that of your mind of the midnight assassin, for the assassin can but kill the body. You strive to kill the soul. You cannot succeed, 'tis true, but the mere attempt is devilish. No shouts, no struggles will serve you here. We are alone with eternal nature. Give the man you have slandered his tardy recognition, or else, as I said before, down you go. Well, to make my story short, he yielded and swore to do as I bade him, whereupon placing my arm around him, as though he were my tender twin brother, I led him safely off the Mauvais Pas and down the Kindlier hill, where, what with the fright and the remains of vertigo, he fell a-weeping grievously. Would you believe it, that before we reached Chamonix, we had become the best friends in the world? He explained himself and his rascally modes of action, and I nobly exonerated him. We exchanged cards, and when we parted, this same author's bugbear Mcqueen, overcome with sentiment and whiskey toddy, he is a Scotchman, you know, swore that I was the grandest fellow in the world, and that if ever he could serve me, he would. He knew my princely title by this, but he would have given me still a higher name. You are not a poet yourself, he murmured, leaning on me fondly as he rolled to bed. I told him, no, I'm sorry, very. He declared the tears of whiskey and rising to his eyes. If you had been, I would have done a great thing for you. I would have boomed you for nothing. I felt him snoring nobly and saw him no more. But I think he'll recognize me, Geoffrey, and I'll go and look him up personally. By all the gods, if he had only known who held him between life and death upon the Mauvais Pas. I stared, puzzled. But he did know, I said. Did you not say you exchanged cards? Oh, true, but that was afterwards. And Lucio laughed. I assure you, my dear fellow, we can manage Mcqueen. I was intensely interested in the story as he told it. He had such a dramatic way of speaking and looking, while the very gestures brought the whole scene vividly before me like a picture. I spoke out my thought impulsively. You would certainly make a superb actor, Lucio. How do you know I'm not one? He asked with a flashing glance. Then he added quickly, no, there is no occasion to paint the face and prance all over the boards before the row of tawdry footlights, like the paid mimes, in order to be historically great. The finest actor is he who can play the comedy of life perfectly, as I aspire to do. to walk well, talk well, smile well, weep well, groan well, laugh well, and die well. It is all pure acting, because in every man there is the dumb, dreadful, immortal. Because in every man there, oh, the dumb, because in every man there is the dumb, dreadful, immortal spirit who is real, who cannot act, who is, and who steadily maintains an infinite, though speechless, protest against the body's lie. I said nothing in answer to this outburst. I was beginning to be used to his shifting humors and strange utterances. They increased the mysterious attraction I had for him, and made his character a perpetual riddle to me, which was not without its subtle charm. Every now and then I realized, with a faintly startled sense of self-abasement, that I was completely under his dominance, that my life was being entirely guided by his control and suggestion. But I argued with myself that surely it should be so, seeing he had so much more experience and influence than I. We dined together that night, as we often did, and our conversation was entirely taken up with monetary and business concerns. Under Lucio's advice, I was making several important investments, and these matters gave us ample subject for discussion. At about 11 o'clock, it being a fine, frosty evening, and fit for brisk walking, we went out, our destination being the private gambling club to which my companion had volunteered to introduce me as a guest. It was situated at the end of a mysterious little back street, not far from the respectable Princettes of the Pall Mall, and was an unpretentious-looking house enough outside, but within it was sumptuously, though tastelessly, furnished. Apparently, the premises were presided over by a woman with painted eyes and dyed hair, who received us first of all within the lamp-lighted splendors of an Anglo-Japanese drawing-room. Her looks and manner undisguisedly proclaimed her as a demi-mondaine of the most pronounced type, one of those pure ladies with a past who are presented as such martyrs to the vices of men. Lucio said something to her apart, whereupon she glanced at me deferentially and smiled, then rang the bell. A discreet-looking manservant in sober black made his appearance, and at the slight sign from his mistress, who bowed to me as I passed her, proceeded to show us upstairs. We trod on a carpet of the softest felt. In fact, I noticed that everything was rendered as noiseless as possible in this establishment, the very doors being covered with thick baize and swinging on silent hinges. On the upper landing, the servant knocked very cautiously at a side door. A key turned in the lock, and we were admitted into a long double room, very brilliantly lit with electric lamps, which at first glance seemed crowded with men playing at rouge et noir and baccarat. Some looked up as Lucio entered and nodded smilingly, others glanced inquisitively at me, but our entrance was otherwise scarcely noticed. Lucio, drawing me along by the arm, sat down to watch the play. I followed his example, and presently found myself infected by the intense excitement which permeated the room like the silent tension of the air before a thunderstorm. I recognized the faces of many well-known public men eminent in politics and society, whom one would never have imagined capable of supporting a gambling club by their presence and authority. But I took care to betray no sign of surprise, and quietly observed the games and the gamesters with the almost as impassive a demeanor as that of my companion. I was prepared to play and to lose. I was not, however, prepared for the strange scene which was soon to occur, and in which I, by force of circumstances, was compelled to take leading part. Chapter 10. As soon as the immediate game we were watching was finished, players rose and greeted Lucio with a good deal of eagerness and effusion. I instinctively guessed from their manner that they looked upon him as an influential member of the club, a person likely to lend them money to gamble with, and otherwise to oblige them in various ways, financially speaking. He introduced me to them, and I was not slow to perceive the effect my name had upon most of them. I was asked if I would join in a game of baccarat, and I readily consented. The stakes were ruinously high, but I had no need to falter for that. One of the players near me was a fair-haired young man, handsome in the face, and of aristocratic bearing. He had been introduced to me as Viscount Linton, and I noticed him particularly on account of this reckless way he had of doubling his stakes suddenly and apparently out of mere bravado. And when he lost, as he mostly did, he laughed uproariously as though he were drunk or delirious. On first beginning to play, I was entirely indifferent as to the result of the game, caring nothing at all as to whether I had losses or gains. Lucio did not join us, but sat apart quietly observant, and watching me, so I fancied more than anyone. And as chance would have it, all the luck came my way, and I won steadily. The more I won, the more excited I became, till presently my humor changed, and I was seized by a whimsical desire to lose. I suppose it was the touch of some better impulse in my nature that made me wish for this young Linton's sake, for he seemed literally maddened by my constant winnings, and continued his foolhardily and desperate play. His young face grew drawn and sharply thin, and his eyes glittered with hungry feverishness. The other gamesters, though sharing in his run of ill luck, seemed better able to stand it, or perhaps they concealed their feelings more cleverly. Anyhow, I know I caught myself very earnestly wishing this devil's luck of mine would desert me and set in the young Viscount's direction. But my wishes were of no use. Again and again I gathered up the stakes till at last the players rose, Viscount Linton among them. "Well, I'm cleaned out," he said, with a loud, forced laugh. "You must give me my chance of a revouche tomorrow, Mr. Tempest." I bowed with pleasure. He called a waiter at the end of the room to bring him a brandy and soda, and meanwhile I was surrounded by the rest of the men, all of them repeating the Viscount's suggestion of a revanche, and strenuously urging upon me the necessity of returning to the club the next night in order to give them an opportunity of winning back what they had lost. I readily agreed, and while we were in the midst of talk, Lucio suddenly addressed young Linton. "Will you make up another game with me?" he inquired. "I'll start the bank with this." He placed 2 crisp notes of £500 each on the table. There was a moment's silence. The Viscount was thirstily drinking his brandy and soda, and glanced over the rim of his tall tumbler at the notes with covetous, bloodshot eyes. Then he shrugged his shoulders indifferently. "I can stake anything," he said. "I've already told you I'm cleaned out. Stony broke, as the slang goes. It's no use my joining." Sit down, Linton," urged one man near him. "I'll lend you enough to go on with." "Thanks, I'd rather not," he returned, flushing a little. "I'm too much in your debt already." "Awfully good of you all the same. You go on, you fellows. I'll watch the play." "Let me persuade you, Viscount Linton," said Lucio, looking at him with his dazzling, inscrutable smile. "Just for the fun of the thing, if you do not feel justified in staking money, stake something trifling and merely nominal for the sake of seeing whether the luck will return. And here he took up the counter. This frequently presents £50. Let it represent for once something that is not valuable like money. Your soul, for example." A burst of laughter broke from all the men. Lucio laughed softly with them. "We all have, I hope, enough instruction in modern science to be aware that there is no such thing as a soul in existence," he continued. "Therefore, in proposing it as a stake for this game at baccarat, I really propose less than 1 hair of your head, because the hair is something, and the soul is nothing. Come, will you risk that non-existent quantity for the chance of winning £1,000? The Viscount drained off the last drop of brandy, and turned upon his eyes, flashing mingled derision and defiance. "Done," he exclaimed. Whereupon the party sat down. The game was brief, and in its rapid excitement almost breathless. 6 or 7 minutes sufficed, and Lucio rose the winner. He smiled as he pointed to the counter, which had represented Viscount Linton's last stake. "I have won," he said quietly. "But you owe me nothing, my dear Viscount, inasmuch as you risked nothing. We played this game simply for fun. If souls had any existence, of course, I should claim yours. I wonder what I should do with it, by the way." He laughed, good and humoredly. "What nonsense, isn't it? And how thankful we ought to be that we live in advanced days like the present, when such silly superstitions are being swept aside by the march of progress and pure reason. Good night. Tempest and I will give you in full revenge tomorrow. The luck is sure to change by then, and you will probably have the victory. Again, good night." He held out his hand, and there was a peculiar melting of tenderness in his brilliant dark eyes, an impressive kindness in his manner, something I could not tell what, held us all for the moment spellbound, as if by enchantment. And several of the players at other tables, hearing the eccentric stake that had been wagered and lost, looked over at us curiously from a distance. Viscount Linton, however, professed himself immensely diverted and shook Lucio's proffered hand heartily. "You are an awfully good fellow," he said, speaking a little thickly and hurriedly, "and I assure you seriously, if I had a soul, I should be very glad to part with it for £1,000 at the present moment. The soul wouldn't be an atom of use to me, and the £1,000 would, but I feel convinced I shall win tomorrow." "Oh, I'm equally sure you will," returned Lucio affably. "And in the meantime, you will not find my friend here, Geoffrey Tempest, a hard creditor. He can afford to wait. But in the case of the lost soul—" Here he paused, looking straight into the young man's eyes. "Of course I cannot afford to wait." The Viscount smiled vaguely at this pleasantry, and almost immediately afterwards left the club. As soon as the door had closed behind him, several of the gamesters exchanged sensuous nods and glances. "Ruined," said one of them in a sotto voce. "His gambling debts are more than he can ever pay," added another, "and I hear he has lost a clear 50,000 on the turf." These remarks were made indifferently, as though one should talk of the weather. No sympathy was expressed, no pity wasted. Every gambler there was selfish to the core, and as I studied their hardened faces, a thrill of honest indignation moved me. Indignation mingled with shame. I was not yet altogether callous or cruel-hearted, though, as I took back upon those days which now resemble a wild vision rather than a reality, I know that I was becoming more and more of a brutal egoist with every hour I lived. Still, I was far then from being utterly vile, that I inwardly resolved to write to Viscount Linton that very evening and tell him to consider his debt to me cancelled, as I should refuse to claim it. While this thought was passing through my mind, I met Lucio's gaze fixed steadily upon me. He smiled, and presently signed to me to accompany him. In a few minutes, we had left the club and were out in the cold night air under a heaven of frostily sparkling stars. Standing still for a moment, my companion laid his hand on my shoulder. "Tempest, if you are going to be kind-hearted or sympathetic to undeserving rascals, I shall have to part company with you," he said with a curious mixture of satire and seriousness in his voice. "I see by the expression of your face that you are meditating some silly disinterested action of pure generosity. Now you might just as well flop down on these paving stones and begin saying prayers in public. You want to let Linton off his debt. You are a fool for your pains. He is a born scoundrel, and has never seen his way to being anything else. Why should you compassionate him? From the time he was first went to college till now, he has been doing nothing but live a life of degraded sensuality. He is in worthless rake, less to be respected than an honest dog. Yet someone loves him, I dare say, I said. Someone loves him, echoed Lucio, with inimitable disdain. Bah! 3 ballet girls live on him, if that is what you mean. His mother loved him, but she is dead. He broke her heart. He is no good, I tell you. Let him pay his debt in full, even to the soul he staked so lightly. If I were the devil now, and had just won the strange game we played tonight, I suppose, according to priestly tradition, I should be piling up the fire for Linton in high glee. But being what I am, I say, let the man alone to make his own destiny. Let things take their course, and as he chose to risk everything, so let him pay everything. We were by this time walking slowly into Pall Mall. I was on the point of making some reply when, catching sight of a man's figure on the opposite side of the way, not far from Marlborough Club, I uttered an involuntary exclamation. Why, there he is, I said. There's Viscount Linton. Lucio's hand closed tightly on my arm. You don't want to speak to him now, surely? No, but I wonder where he's going. He walks rather unsteadily. Drunk, most probably. And Lucio's face presented the same relentless expression of scorn I had so often seen and marveled at. We paused a moment, watching the Viscount strolling aimlessly up and down in front of the clubs, till all at once he seemed to come to a sudden resolution, and stopped short. He shouted, Handsome! A silent-wheeled smart vehicle came bowling up immediately. Giving some order to the driver, he jumped in. The cab approached swiftly in our direction. Just as it passed us, the loud report of a pistol crashed on the silence. Good God, I cried, reeling back a step or two. He has shot himself. The hansom stopped. The driver sprang down. Club porters, waiters, policemen, and no end of people starting up from heaven knows where, were on the scene on an instant. I rushed forward to join the rapidly gathering throng, but before I could do so, Lucio's strong arm was thrown round me, and he dragged me by main force away. Keep cool, Geoffrey, he said. Do you want to be called up to identify and betray the club and all its members? Not while I'm here to prevent you. Check your mad impulses, my good fellow. They will lead you into no end of difficulties. If the man's dead, he's dead, and there is an end of it. Lucio, you have no heart, I exclaimed, struggling violently to escape from his hold. How can you stop to reason in such a case? Think of it. I am the cause of all of this mischief. It is my cursed luck at baccarat this evening that has been the final blow to the wretched young fellow's fortunes. I am convinced of it. I shall never forgive myself. Upon my word, Geoffrey, your conscience is very tender, he answered, holding my arm still more closely and hurrying me away despite myself. You must try and toughen it up a little if you want to be successful in life. Your cursed luck, you think, has caused Linton's death? Surely it's a contradiction in terms to call luck cursed. And as for the Viscount, he did not need that last game at baccarat to emphasize his ruin. You are not to blame. And for the sake of the club, if nothing else, I do not intend either of you or myself to be mixed up in this case of suicide. The coroner's verdict always disposes of the incidents comfortably in 2 words, temporary insanity. I shuddered. My soul sickened as I thought that within a few yards of us was the bleeding corpse of the man I had so lately seen alive and spoken with, and notwithstanding Lucio's words, I felt as if I had murdered him. Temporary insanity, repeated Lucio again, as if speaking to himself. All remorse, despair, outraged honor, wasted love, together with the scientific modern theory of reasonable nothingness, life a nothing, God a nothing, when these drive the disgraced human unit to make himself also a nothing, temporary insanity covers up his plunge into the infinite with an untruthful pleasantness. However, after all, it is, as Shakespeare says, a mad world. I made no answer. I was too overcome by my own miserable sensations. I walked along, almost unconscious of the movement, and as I stared bewilderedly up at the stars, they danced before my sight like fireflies. Whirling in the midst of miasma, presently a faint hope occurred to me. Perhaps, I said, he's not really killed himself. It may be only an attempt. Oh, he's a capital shot, returned Lucio composedly. That was his one quality. He had no principles, but he was a good marksman. I cannot imagine his missing aim. It is horrible. An hour ago alive. And now I tell you, Lucio, it's horrible. What is? Death? It is not half so horrible as life lived wrongly. He responded with gravity that impressed me in spite of my emotion and excitement. Believe me, the mental sickness and confusion of the willfully degraded existence are worse tortures than are contained in the priestly notions of hell. Come, Geoffrey, you take this matter too much to heart. You are not to blame. If Linton has given himself the happy dispatch, it is really the best thing he could do. He was of no use to anybody, and he is well out of it. It is positively weak of you to attach importance to such a trifle. You are only at the beginning of your own career. While I hope that career will not lead me into any more such tragedies as the one enacted tonight, I said passionately. If it does, I will entirely against my will. Lucio looked at me curiously. Nothing can happen to you against your will, he replied. I suppose you wish to imply that I am to blame for introducing you to the club. My good fellow, you need not have gone there unless you had chosen to do so. I did not bind and drag you there. You are upset and unnerved. Come into my room and take a glass of wine. You will feel more than a man afterwards. We had by this time reached the hotel, and I went with him passively. With equal passiveness, I drank what he gave me and stood, glass in hand, watching him with a kind of morbid fascination as he threw off his fur-lined overcoat and confronted me. His pale, handsome face strangely sat and stern, and his dark eyes glinting like cold steel. That last stake of Linton's, to you, I said falteringly, his soul, which he did not believe in, and which you do not believe in, returned Lucio, regarding me fixedly. Why do you now seem to tremble at the mere sentimental idea? If fantastic notions such as God, the soul, and the devil were real, facts, there would perhaps be cause for trembling, but being only the brain-sick imaginations of superstitious mankind, there is nothing in them to awaken the slightest anxiety or fear. But you, I began, you say you believe in the soul. I am brain-sick. And he laughed bitterly. Have you not found that out yet? Much learning hath driven you mad, my friend. Science has led me into such deep wells of dark discovery that it is no wonder if my senses sometimes reel. And I believe, at such insane moments, in the soul. I sighed heavily. I think I will go to bed, I answered. I'm tired out, and absolutely miserable. Oh, alas, poor millionaire, said Lucio gently. I am sorry. I assure you that the evening has ended so disastrously. So am I returned despondently. Imagine it, he went on, dreamily regarding me. If my beliefs, my crack-brained theories, were worth anything, which they are not, I could claim the only positive existing part of our late acquaintance, Viscount Linton, but where and how to send in my account with him. If I were Satan now, I forced a faint smile. You would have cause to rejoice, I said. He moved 2 paces towards me and laid his hands gently on my shoulders. No, Geoffrey. And his rich voice had a strange soft music in it. No, my friend. If I were Satan, I should probably lament, for every lost soul would of necessity remind me of my own fall, my own despair, and set another bar between myself and heaven. Remember, the very devil was an angel once. His eyes smiled, and yet I could have sworn there were tears in them. I wrung his hand hard. I felt that, notwithstanding his assumed coldness and cynicism, the fate of young Linton had affected him profoundly. My liking for him gained new fervor from this impression, and I went to bed more at ease with myself and things in general. During the few minutes I spent in undressing, I became even able to contemplate the tragedy of the evening with less regret and greater calmness. For it was certainly no use worrying over the irrevocable, and after all, what interest had the Viscount's life for me? None. I began to ridicule myself for my own weakness and disinterested emotion, and presently, being thoroughly fatigued, fell sound asleep. Towards morning, however, perhaps about 4 or 5 o'clock, I woke suddenly as though touched by an invisible hand. I was shivering violently, and my body was bathed in cold perspiration. In the otherwise dark room there was something strangely luminous, like a cloud of white smoke or fire. I started up, rubbing my eyes, and stared before me for a moment, doubting the evidence of my own senses. For plainly visible and substantially distinct at a distance of perhaps 5 paces from my bed stood 3 figures, muffled in dark garments and closely hooded. So solemnly inert they were, so heavily did their sable draperies fall about them, that it was impossible to tell whether they were men or women. But what paralyzed me with amazement and terror was the strange light that played around and above them, the spectral, wandering, chill radiance that illuminated them like rays of a faint wintry moon. I strove to cry out, but my tongue refused to obey me, and my voice was strangled in my throat. The 3 remained absolutely motionless, and again I rubbed my eyes, wondering if there was a dream or some hideous optical delusion. Trembling in every limb, I stretched out my hand towards the bell, intending to ring violently for assistance, when a voice, low and thrilling with intense anguish, caused me to shrink back appalled, and my arm fell nerveless at my side. Misery! The word struck the air with harsh, reproachful clang, and I nearly swooned with the horror of it. For now one of the figures moved, and the face gleamed out from beneath its hooded wrappings, a face white as the whitest marble, and fixed into such expression of dreadful despair as froze my blood. Then came a deep sigh that was more like the death groan, and again the word misery shuddered upon the silence. Mad with fear, and scarcely knowing what I did, I sprang from bed and began desperately to advance upon these fantastic masqueraders, determined to seize them and demand the meaning of this practical and untimely jest. When suddenly all 3 lifted their heads and turned their faces on me, such faces, indescribably awful in their appalled agony, and a whisper more ghastly than a shriek penetrated the very fibers of my consciousness. Misery! With a furious bound, I flung myself upon them. My hand struck empty space. Yet there, distinct as ever, they stood glowering down upon me, while my clenched fists beat impotently through and beyond their seeming corporeal shapes. And then all at once I became aware of their eyes that watched me piteously, steadfastly, and disdainfully. Eyes that, like witch fires, seemed to slowly burn terrific meanings into my very flesh and spirit. Convulsed and almost frantic with the strain of my nerves, I abandoned myself to despair. This ghastly sight meant death, I thought. My last hour had surely come. Then I saw the lips of one of those dreadful faces move. Some superhuman instinct in me leaped to life. In some strange way, I thought I knew or guessed the horror of what that next utterance would be. And with all my remaining force, I cried out, "No! No, not that eternal doom, not yet. Fighting the vacant air, I strove to beat back those intangible, awful shapes that loomed above me, withering up my soul with the fixed stare of their angry eyes. And with a choking call for help, I fell, as it were, into a pit of darkness where I lay mercifully unconscious. That is where we end for the evening, my darlings. It's getting good. It's kind of a ghost story. I almost feel sorry for Prince Lucio. But anyway, if you are enjoying my channel, make certain you give it a like, make certain you give it a share. Thank you for your likes, your comments. You really mean the world to me. Also, if you would like to support this channel, a great way of saying thank you is through Patreon. That's the best way. You can go to patreon.com/thegentlemanpsychic. You could also find me on PayPal, which is rlillard6@gmail.com, and on I can't even remember the other one right now. I have another one, but it's at Richard-Lael Lillard, and I don't know why I can't remember it, but that's the other one. PayPal, I can't remember. Anyway, lovelies, thank you for joining me this evening. I look forward to seeing you soon, and I love each and every one of you. Have a beautiful and wonderful evening. Good night.